Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another video here on the SSA Philosophy channel, where we dive into the philosophy of characters, from video games to TV shows to movies, etc., etc. So, here in today's video, this will mark pretty much a two-parter here today. So what we're gonna be focusing on, we're gonna be focusing, of course, on once again the last videos here overall for pretty much coming to an end with Black History Month, and that, of course, today we'll be focusing on the rise of Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, both who are founders of the Black Panther Party. So today we're gonna focus currently overall, on this part, focusing on covering Huey P. Newton, and then on the next part we're gonna also focus on covering Bobby Seale here today in this video. So, of course, as always, let's not waste any time. Let us go on ahead and let us get started to the video here today. So, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale are two pivotal figures in the history of the civil rights movement, most notably for co-founding the Black Panther Party in 1966. And the Black Panther Party, originally called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, was a revolutionary socialist organization that sought to address systemic racism, police brutality, and the overall disenfranchisement of Black Americans. Newton and Seale, their vision and leadership were integral to shaping the trajectory of Black activism in the 1960s and beyond. So, like I said before, we're going to go right on ahead and get started, and we're going to focus here today on Huey P. Newton, and then on the next part, we'll focus on covering Bobby Seale. So, pretty much having parts overall where we focus on both individuals. So, focus on one today and focusing on the next individual in the next part. So, let's start on ahead with Huey P. Newton. So Huey P. Newton, born on February 17th, 1942, in Monroe, Louisiana. Huey P. Newton was the second of seven children in his family. His parents, Walter Newton and Armelia Johnson, were both African American, and his early life, it was marked by the instability and adversity that accompanied growing up in the segregated South. His father, Walter, was a tractor driver who struggled with alcoholism and was often absent, while his mother, Armelia, was a strong figure who worked hard to provide for her children. Now, Newton's family was poor, and their economic situation was exacerbated by the racial inequality of the time. His early experiences with poverty, discrimination, and violence would become central to his revolutionary consciousness. So the family, they moved from Louisiana to Oakland, California. And when he was young, when he was a young child, part of the larger migration of African Americans seeking better opportunities in the North and the West. And in Oakland, he encountered the harsh realities of urban poverty, which were compounded by institutional racism. And the neighborhood in which he grew up in was heavily segregated, with Black residents confined to underdeveloped areas, suffering from poor housing, high unemployment, and substandard schools. So the school system in Oakland, as in many parts of America, reinforced systemic inequalities, offering Black children few opportunities for advancement. And it was during this period in Oakland that Newton began to develop a critical awareness of race and class, albeit in the context of a young boy trying to make sense of the world around him. So the social and political environment of Oakland, particularly in the presence of the Black working class and the increasing militarization of police in Black neighborhoods, will later be vital in shaping Newton's ideas. So his educational journey was complicated and inconsistent. He attended several schools in Oakland where he faced the dual challenges of being Black in a racially divided society and dealing with the pressures of being an academically underperforming student. And throughout his early education, he struggled with academic achievement and his experience in the public school system. And so, really, his experience in public school system, it was far from encouraging. His performance was often marked by poor grades and behavior issues, and he found himself frequently at odds with authority figures. However, it was not only the lack of academic success that defined his early years in education, but also the profound sense of alienation that many black students had experienced in the system. So his difficulties in school, they were compounded by an educational system that largely ignored the intellectual needs and cultural identity of African American students. Because schools in Oakland, like many other urban areas across the United States, they were overcrowded, they were underfunded, and they were staffed by teachers who were ill prepared to address the unique challenges of teaching black students. Yet, despite these obstacles, Newton had a voracious intellectual curiosity that would drive him to explore radical political thought. And the turning point in Newton's educational development came when he enrolled at Merritt College in Oakland. And Merritt College, so it provided a somewhat more conductive environment or more conducive environment for students of color, especially those from working class backgrounds. But it was still a microcosm of the larger issues of racism and inequality in American society. And it was here that Newton encountered ideas that would shape his political philosophy and set him on the path to becoming a revolutionary leader. And at Merritt College, he became increasingly involved in political discussions and debates. And he also joined a radical student group and he began to read extensively, delving into Marxism, black nationalism, and the writings of figures such as Karl Marx, Lenin, and Mao Zedong. So it was at Merritt College that he first encountered the ideas that would define the Black Panther Party, particularly the concept of armed self defense and the fight for the liberation of Black people. So Newton was deeply influenced by the philosophy of Black Power, which sought to empower African Americans by any means necessary, including self defense against police brutality, and he also formed important intellectual and personal connections during his time at Merritt College. And it was here that he met Bobby Seale, with whom he co-founded the party with in 1966. So the two, they both shared a passion for social justice, and they had a mutual desire to combat police brutality and systemic oppression. So Newton and Seale's partnership, it was instrumental in the formation of the Black Panther Party's ideology, which combined revolutionary Marxism with the distinct needs and realities of the African American community. And his time at Merritt College also exposed him to the influence of the civil rights movement, particularly the work of figures like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, who argued for a more radical approach to achieving black liberation. So Newton's readings and the political environment at Merritt College were pivotal in shaping his revolutionary consciousness, and he became increasingly determined to confront the systemic injustice that African Americans had faced. And as his intellectual development, as it progressed, so too did his political radicalization. Because he began to see education not just as a means of personal advancement, but as a tool to dismantle the structures of power that oppressed African Americans. Because his evolving understanding of history, class struggle, and race relations, it pushed him toward a more confrontational approach to activism. While some of his early influences, like the civil rights movement, advocated for integration and nonviolence, his experiences led him to embrace the idea that black people needed to defend themselves against the state, which he saw as inherently hostile to their survival. So this intellectual maturation was not without its challenges, because he struggled with the contradictions with his own beliefs, and he was influenced by both the Marxist theory and the Black nationalist movement, both of which often had conflicting views on the role of violence in social change. Nevertheless, he synthesized these ideas into a revolutionary vision that would drive the Black Panther Party's activities in the coming years. So he believed that Black Americans, they needed to arm themselves in self-defense against the police and other forms of state violence, and that their fight for freedom was tied to the global struggle against imperialism and colonialism. And by the time he had completed his studies at Merritt College, Newton had become a figure who was both deeply intellectual and profoundly committed to social change. So the young man who had struggled academically as a child had now become a political thinker capable of articulating a comprehensive critique of American society. And this combination of intellectualism and activism would become one of Newton's defining characteristics, as he would go on to lead one of the most influential revolutionary organizations in American history. So by the mid 19 mid so so by the mid 1960s, the American Civil Rights Movement had made substantial strides through efforts led by organizations such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Congress of Racial Equality. And the passage of landmark legislation, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, signified the formal dismantling of legal segregation and discriminatory practices. However, these gains, they were not universally felt. They weren't universally felt, especially in urban areas like Oakland, California, where economic deprivation, poor educational opportunities, substandard housing, and rampant police violence were pervasive. And the aftermath of the Watts riots of 1965 in Los Angeles, sparked by an incident of police brutality, it underscored the severity of racial tensions in inner city neighborhoods, because the riots, they were a visible manifestation of frustration with the federal government's inability to address the lived realities of Black Americans. And these events, they created fertile ground for new, more militant forms of activism, shifting the focus from legal equality to the self-determination of Black communities. So in this context, Newton's worldview and his philosophy emerged, because Newton, a young intellectual with a deep commitment to addressing the issues facing his community, was influenced by revolutionary ideas from around the world. So once again, influenced by the Marxist ideas, the Leninist ideas, and Maoist thoughts as well too. So, along with his close friend Bobby Seale, he began to develop a framework for an organization that would not only that would not only challenge police violence, but also advocate for broader systemic change. So, on October 15th, 1966, both Newton and Bobby Seale, they both founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland, California. And the original mission of the organization, it was to protect Black communities from the police brutality. So at its inception, the Panthers were very much inspired by the notion of self defense, particularly the Second Amendment's guarantee of the right to bear arms. And their actions, so their early actions involved organizing armed patrols in Oakland to monitor police activity in Black neighborhoods. And the concept of self defense, it was rooted in Newton's deep understanding of the power dynamics between the police and Black communities. And in a city like Oakland, where police forces were known for their brutality against Black residents, the Black Panther Party's armed patrols were both a direct response to these conditions, and also they were a challenge to the legitimacy of the police. So Newton, he believed that the police force, operating within a system that disproportionately targeted Black people, was an oppressive institution, and the community needed to assert its right to protect itself. Now, while the early Black Panther Party was primarily concerned with the immediate threat of police violence, Newton's philosophy was inherently radical. He recognized that the fight against police oppression could not be isolated from the broader struggle for social and economic justice. So he combined his understanding of civil rights with a critique of capitalism, arguing that the economic system itself was a primary cause of Black American suffering. So his ideas, his views, they were all central to the Panthers' ideological framework. So these ideologies, the writings by Karl Marx, Mao Zedong, and even Che Guevara, among others, they all informed the Panthers' belief that true liberation could not be achieved through the civil rights movement's emphasis on integration and incremental change. Rather, Newton envisioned a complete societal overhaul that would dismantle the capitalist structures that perpetuated inequality. So, in its earliest stages, the party was small. It was a small local organization, However, though, Newton and Seale's clear message and direct action, it attracted attention because they gained a following among disaffected youth, particularly in Oakland, who were drawn to their militant stance and uncompromising rhetoric. So the Panthers' armed patrols were a visible demonstration of their willingness to take action, but they also engaged in various community programs that were aimed at uplifting Black people. And one of the Black Panther Party's hallmark initiatives, it was the creation of community programs such as the free breakfast program, the free breakfast for children program. And the program, it began in Oakland and quickly spread to other cities, providing free meals to children in impoverished neighborhoods before they went to school. And it was one of the many survival programs that were designed to meet the immediate needs of Black communities while promoting self reliance and collective action. And another critical aspect of the party's early activities was their education initiatives. Because Newton and the Black Panthers, they emphasized the importance of education as a tool for empowerment. They promoted political education classes for their members and encouraged critical thinking about the socio political forces that oppress Black Americans. So Newton believed that the Black community had to be educated in revolutionary ideology in order to create the systemic change necessary for true liberation. So really at its core, his ideology was deeply rooted in the notion of empowerment because he sought to create a world in which Black Americans had control over their own destinies. His idea of revolutionary humanism called for a synthesis of radical political action and humanitarian principles, seeking justice not only for Black people, but for really all oppressed groups. However, his leadership was also not without controversy because his later years were marked by increasing internal discord, personal struggles, and public conflicts with other members of the Black Panther Party. And despite this, he still remained a powerful symbol of resistance against racial oppression and injustice. So his personal resilience, his intellectual rigor, and unwavering commitment to revolutionary principles made him a respected figure in Black liberation movements, even as the Black Panther Party faced increasing challenges. So in October 1967, Huey P. Newton was involved in a violent confrontation with the Oakland Police Department that would lead to his arrest and also catapult him into national spotlight. Newton, while driving with another member of the Black Panther Party, was stopped by two members, and the incident quickly escalated. And what transpired next remains a subject of debate, because according to the official police account, Newton shot and killed Officer John Frey, while wounding Officer Herbert Haynes, who was also involved in the incident. The police report claimed that Newton, he was the aggressor, and that the shooting was an unprovoked act of violence. However, Newton's supporters maintained that he was acting in self-defense, and the Black Panther Party's version of the events emphasized that Newton was shot first and that he had been subjected to police brutality during previous encounters. So Newton himself, he later described the altercation as a struggle for survival, one that was colored by the pervasive racial animus that was directed at him and his comrades. So regardless of the conflicting narratives, the result of the confrontation was clear. Huey Newton was arrested and charged with the murder of Officer Frey and the attempted murder of Officer Haynes. So Newton's arrest immediately it became a flashpoint for national debate. And that's when the Free Huey campaign came in. Because the Free Huey campaign, it galvanized African Americans and other radical groups, especially within urban centers like Oakland, Los Angeles, and Chicago, as they saw in Newton's case a reflection of the systemic violence African Americans face at the hands of the police. So the Black Panther Party's ability to rally masses in the name of Newton and their sharp critique of the police resonated with broader struggles for racial justice, appealing particularly to young Black militants who were disillusioned with traditional civil rights strategies. And also in the wake of his arrest, Tensions between the Panthers and the law enforcement had escalated. The FBI's counterintelligence program, also known as COINTELPRO, which sought to undermine and disrupt organizations perceived as subversive, really it would soon turn its full attention to the Black Panther Party. And Newton, a charismatic leader, he quickly became a symbol of the party's power and its defiance against the U.S. government. But his arrest it also marked the beginning of the party's entanglement with state repression, a pattern that would characterize much of the Black Panther Party's history. So the charges against Newton, they were serious, and his legal defense was both highly publicized and highly contentious. So his trial it took place in 1968, and it became a focal point for the Black Panther Party, with supporters staging rallies and protests to demand justice. And while he was in jail, the leadership of the party was at a crossroads because as the co-founder and head of the Black Panther Party, Newton's leadership, so his leadership style was described as autocratic. Yet he relied heavily on the collective efforts of others within the party, such as Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, and others who would later become controversial figures in their own right. So his legal defense was organized with the help of prominent black lawyers, including Charles Gary, who used a strategy that focused on discrediting the police's version of events and highlighting the racial dynamics at play. The defense argued that Newton had acted in self-defense, pointing to evidence that suggested that he had been shot first by police officers, contradicting the official narrative. However, the case it was complicated by the fact that he had a criminal record and the legal proceedings they were drawn out, reflecting both his contentious position within the political landscape and the broader struggle for justice for black Americans. So the trial of Huey P. Newton also symbolized the wider ideological and strategic divisions within the Black Panther Party itself. Because while he remained committed to the party's foundational principles of armed self defense and anti imperialism, others within the party, like Eldridge Cleaver, he pushed for more. He pushed for more aggressive actions, including the use of violence in their revolutionary aims. So these differences will later lead to a split in the party, with various factions jockeying for power and Newton's own leadership. While initially a unifying force, it would eventually become a strain. It will because really it would eventually become strained by these internal tensions, as well as the external pressures of constant surveillance, repression, and media attacks. And in 1970, after a long and contentious legal battle, Newton was eventually acquitted of the charges of murder. And the case against him it fell apart due to the lack of evidence and the credibility issues that were surrounding the police officers that were involved. However, his acquittal it was bittersweet, as it came at the cost of deeper divisions within the Black Panther Party, and the party would continue to face increasing opposition from both law enforcement and factions within the movement. So, when it comes down really to the struggles with the law enforcement and with the FBI, because because the Panthers, the confrontational approach to the police, including their open carry of firearms, it made them targets for law enforcement agencies because they weren't merely an activist group, but they were a direct challenge to the status quo of policing in black neighborhoods. Because in the eyes of the law enforcement, especially with the FBI, the Black Panther Party represented a growing threat to the American social order. So Newton, with his sharp intellect and radical rhetoric, he was a key figure in this movement. So the Black Panther Party, their actions, while often rooted in the principles of self-defense, they were viewed by the FBI as a direct threat to national security. And the FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, he viewed the Panthers as part of a broader left-wing revolutionary movement. that included Marxists, socialists, and other radicals. So Hoover's anti-communist and anti-black political stance, it led him to see the Black Panther Party's advocacy for black power as something far more dangerous than really than just than just a mere civil rights struggle. So the FBI surveillance of the party was formalized under COINTELPRO. So they began as an effort to neutralize the Communist Party, but they expanded to include the civil rights organizations, anti-war protesters, and Black Power movements. So the Black Panther Party was one of the prime targets of COINTELPRO, and the FBI, through illegal surveillance, wiretaps, and the use of informants, aimed to undermine the leadership of the Black Panther Party, to sow division among its ranks, and also provoke confrontations that could discredit the organization in the eyes of the public. And Newton, in particular, became a central figure in the FBI's efforts to destroy the Black Panther Party, as he was seen as the intellectual and charismatic leader of the group. So, one of the key strategies that were employed by the FBI was the use of their informants to create tensions between Newton and other members of the party. And these informants, they would spread rumors, they would distort information, and sometimes they would even engage in violence. And the goal was to create an atmosphere of distrust and to weaken the Black Panther parties, to weaken their unity. And their efforts were particularly effective in inflaming divisions within the party, especially during times of internal leadership struggles. So basically, while Newton's trial was ongoing, their covert actions, they continued to be unabated because the Bureau, they were relentless in their efforts to vilify Newton and the party. And this wasn't really just about really about enforcing the law, but about controlling the narrative surrounding the Panthers. Through smear campaigns in the press, COINTELPRO agents, they planted stories about his criminal activities and his personal life in an attempt to paint him as a violent and untrustworthy leader. So these efforts were designed to diminish public support for Newton and the Panthers. And they also employed various tactics to discredit his leadership within the party. And once again, it included the rumors about his behavior and then attempting to create rifts within the party. So COINTELPRO, their efforts were not really just aimed at the Panthers as an organization, but at Newton as an individual. So the FBI, they were determined to undermine his status as a leader of black resistance and power, hoping that the broader movement would collapse without his guidance. So despite these efforts, his network, his support base, it still remained strong. And he was released from prison in 1970 after a major campaign, the Free Huey campaign, you know, and his release, it symbolized the ability of grassroots movements to challenge the power of the state, even when the state deployed its full arsenal of surveillance, intimidation, and legal manipulation. So Huey P. Newton, his struggles with law enforcement and the FBI ultimately contributed to the erosion of the Black Panther Party. Internal divisions, governmental pressure, and the strategic destruction of its leadership by the state, it led to the decline of the organization by the early 1970s. So despite this, Newton's influence on the Black Power movement, it still remained profound, and his legacy as a symbol of resistance to state violence endured. The FBI's campaign to neutralize him and the party, it stands as one of the most significant examples of governmental overreach in US history. A clear demonstration of how law enforcement agencies, how they used illegal tactics to silence political opposition. So Newton's resistance to this oppression, both in his legal battles and his political activism, remains an indelible part of the history of black resistance in America. His life, marked by his struggles with the law enforcement and the FBI, also reflects the wider history of state sponsored repression against marginalized groups in the United States. So his story is not just about one man's defiance, but about a larger struggle for justice, equality, and self determination in the face of systemic oppression. So on August 22nd, 1989, Huey Newton was tragically shot and killed in a confrontation in Oakland. So his death, it marked the end of an era for the Black Panther Party. Nevertheless, Newton's legacy as a leader of the party and a symbol of resistance to racial injustice remains central to the history of Black radicalism.